We need to thank Swift, our platinum keynote sponsor, for sponsoring this next session, which is about digital globalisation. What are the opportunities for New Zealand's payments industry? How will innovation disrupt things? What do we need to be wary of? Please welcome the Head of Payments Asia Pacific at Swift, Michael Moon.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael from Swift in Singapore. I first want to thank Payments New Zealand and the industry, the payments industry here in Auckland and New Zealand for having Swift at this conference, and we're delighted to be able to sponsor this event as well. We have a long history in New Zealand, and we really see ourselves as part of the fabric of the payments industry here as well, and a key industry and cooperative partner for the industry as well to actually move to that next level in the payments industry. For my presentation today, I'm really going to focus on some of the disruptions and the trends and the innovations that are occurring in the global payment system. And I'm going to look at this from the perspective of the power of a cooperative. So how can cooperatives and the behaviours behind cooperatives, so cooperating as an industry, improve payment outcomes for stakeholders in the industry and importantly for our customers, whether they be consumers, businesses or government customers as well. And the way I'm going to do that is to set a little bit of the scene in terms of the nature of disruption that's occurring in the industry as well and how that's a bit different these days from what it has been in the past. I'll then show and share some of the game-changing trends or some of these major headwinds that we have, or tailwinds, depending on how you think about it, in our industry and how you can actually navigate through some of those here in New Zealand. And then I'll finish up with a few perspectives on our sort of perspective and thoughts on the New Zealand industry itself. I'll profile 3 or 4 large global-oriented initiatives that Swift is pursuing as a cooperative on behalf of our members and the industry as well. So things like our customer security program, our global payments innovation initiative, the way that we're looking at new technologies such as blockchain and digital ledger, and a little bit on the new payments platform as well. I'll just sort of pause here so you can have a look at this. This is one of my favourite quotes from Warren Buffett. It's actually about 3 years old now, but it doesn't seem to age. He made this quote at a conference at Harvard University, a payments-oriented conference. For those who used to work at American Express, you would know Warren Buffett is a large investor in American Express Corporation as well. And you know, the message behind this quote, I think, is that you have something of a dilemma with regards to innovation, and that dilemma is that we know that things will change, and we see change all the time, but it's very difficult to predict what the next technology is. And when we talk to the industry, financial institutions, central banks, regulators, they're sometimes scratching their head with all this innovation and disruption going on, trying to actually make sense of it. And it creates a little bit of a headache for the industry as well. It also creates opportunities and challenges. You can see this picture here, which has some of these, we've heard it today, some of the digital giants. This is a little bit of a US-focused one. That's a bit neglectful of me not to represent the digital giants from China and India as well. But you can see the smaller piece, the coloured cake or coloured pie, and that's the banks. And you have this whole ecosystem of companies, telecommunication organisations, Google, Amazon, the Alibabas of the world, looking at our industry and saying, this is quite attractive. I see a lot of interesting revenues here. How can my technology, how can my new ideas actually disrupt that or help the industry as well? When we look at the nature of competition and the nature of industry today, it's actually changing a lot. I was in Tianjin in China earlier in the year at the World Economic Forum. And the World Economic Forum has a thesis that we are now moving into what they term the 4th industrial revolution. So you had the first industrial revolution, which is based around water and steam power. The second, Industry 2, if you like, is about the mass commoditization of electricity and new energy sources and all of that driving massive growth in industry. The third one has been about the computer age and networks. And this fourth industry revolution, if you like, or Industry 4, is about this fusion of digital, computers, biological, all coming together, and it leads to massive sources of information. It leads to new technologies in terms of body, behaviour. And what it means in terms of practicing in an industry is you don't really know where the next source of competition will come from or the next challenge to your industry will come from. So we see, for example, organisations like Uber, and everybody talks about the way that Uber is disrupting the taxi or driving industry. And this is just a small story I picked up from the newspaper. And it's actually about the way that Uber is disrupting financial services. And in New York, they have a system where the licensing of taxi cabs is based on they call them medallions for the taxis. It's similar to the license plate regime that you have in Australia, and I think you might have it here as well. And these license plates, these medallions, used to change hands for about $1 million US. So to drive a cab, you used to spend $1 million, and that would mean you borrow money. And as it turns out, these medallions in the last 12, 24 months have actually decreased in value from 1 million to $500,000 US. And it turns out that there's a financial services organisation lending the money for drivers to actually buy these medallions, and they can see the impact of Uber, not just on the taxi industry, but also on their loan book as well. So it's just one small example of how disruption actually can come from very unexpected sources and into our industry, payments and financial services as well. At the same time, we have somewhat of a challenge to some very traditional bedrock foundations of the financial industry. So the idea of money, cash, fiat currencies, US dollar, New Zealand dollar. We see the new digital currencies, the Bitcoins, the Ripples, the XRPs for Ripple. Anybody who travels on an aeroplane today accrues reward points. That, I think, is a form of digital currency as well. So there are these challenges to the way that we're thinking about money. And then there's also a challenge to the way that records have traditionally been stored. So for centuries, records were kept in books, and then they became digitised in computers and databases. And now we have this new concept of a digital ledger or a blockchain as a potentially more efficient, more reliable, more trusted, it cannot be changed, it's a immutable form of record keeping that could be a source of innovation in our industry as well. And then lastly, for our industry, financial services, what we find is that the financial technology and the innovation and the disruption it's not disrupting the industry evenly. So this is a survey from PricewaterhouseCoopers, and it's asking, where do we see disruption occurring in financial services? And if you can't quite see the text, this first bar is on consumer banking, and the second bar is on payments and fund transfers. So there's a concentration of focus in that area. McKinsey actually researches this as well, and their research shows that about 40% of fintech investments are actually directed towards the payments industry as well. So it's a little bit of what's going on in terms of the disruption and the sources of innovation in our industry, and how we all need to actually think about our industry quite differently. So what are some of the trends going on? As you know, Swift hosts an annual conference and exhibition known as CyBOS. We've been doing this for about 25, 30 years. This year we held it in Geneva about a month ago. We had 8,300 delegates through the doors in Geneva. The year before we had 8,300 in Singapore. In 2 years' time we'll be coming to Sydney, so we hope that you can all cross the Tasman and visit CyBOS in Sydney as well in 2 years' time. However, some of the themes that were coming up constantly at the convention and were top of mind for all of the industry practitioners were were firstly regulation. And regulation is something which is causing our industry to do a number of interesting things. Some are causing a constraint or a constriction of our industry. So if you take cross-border payments, the risk of actually carrying cross-border transactions to some marketplaces or dealing with some financial institutions, some of these relationships are actually being severed and reduced. That's known as de-risking. You also see other regulatory moves which are designed to open up payments and open up payment systems. So the best example is probably the Payment Services Directive 2 initiative in Europe, which will basically open bank accounts to other players in the industry as well. So a third-party payment service provider or a PSP can interact with banks and can actually interact with the underlying payment systems as well. And we see this bearing out across the world. In India, you have new payment banks being licensed to actually transact payments. And ultimately, I think you'll see many of these organisations have access to formal payment systems and be able to reach broader groups of participants as well. We see a lot of new entrants, and I shared some of these before in the Pac-Man eating up the banks. I won't talk too much more about that just now. We see emerging technologies, digital ledger technology, but also the importance of API. In Singapore, the Monetary Authority of Singapore is investing 225 million Singapore dollars over 5 years into improving technology in the banking and financial services industry in Singapore. As part of that initiative, in the next few weeks, you'll see them issue, I think they call it a gold book. And it's basically a guide, a dummy's guide, of how you can actually utilize APIs in the banking and financial services industry in Singapore as well. I'm not aware of that occurring anywhere else in the world to date. So this is one example of how a market like Singapore is seeking to actually open up their banking environment and to use API technologies to improve customer outcomes. The other one, of course, is big data and analytics. I'll share a little bit more about that in a moment. And the last major trend is cyber risks. And I'll share a little bit about SWIFT's customer security program and how, as a community cooperative, we're seeking to improve cyber risk management and cyber risk outcomes on a global basis as well. So big data. Big data is interesting, and this is research from the McKinsey Institute. They publish a global connectedness survey, and what they say in that is that the nature of flows across borders is actually changing from traditional flows in goods and services to things like movement of people and, importantly, information. So what they show is that in the last 10 years, data flows have increased 45 times, whereas the flow across borders in goods and services has actually remained quite steady and flat. I don't have it here, but they also publish a ranking of how countries score in their levels of connectedness. And I checked the numbers before. New Zealand is at about number 47 globally. Australia is at about 25. Can you guess what the number one is? It's actually Singapore. And probably a lot of that is a carryover from the goods and services trade base as well. Part of what Singapore is doing is actually looking to make sure that they can participate in these information and people flows as well. Countries like Germany score very high. Countries like Japan score very low. So very interesting survey, and it's one of these key trends that you really need to understand and be part of. I was very interested in hearing about some of the cross-border payment companies here as well, the LatiPay, and really working out how you can serve the needs of these Chinese customers, whether they're consumers, travellers, businesses interacting with New Zealand businesses as well. I think it's a remarkable example of how an economy like New Zealand can really participate in these trends. And then if we go to real-time payments, we've been talking about instant and fast payments. The reality is real-time payments is really not just about being fast anymore. We see it more about opening up access, and we see this in the design of the new payments platform with the overlay architecture. That's an example of allowing access to an underlying payment system to many different providers. So BPay being the first provider with the initial convenience service, the simpler addressing, or what people refer to here as the proxy addressing as well. APIs to anything. So we live in an API economy, an API age in terms of banking and financial services. You really need to be able to connect very easily to different providers and different services. And then I think this term was actually coined in New Zealand. Some very good work with the direction work here, this intelligent messaging. I thought it was a very nice way to capture the value of richer information in payments as well. So providing intelligent messaging that actually enhances the underlying, quite boring payments experience for a customer as well. So intelligent messaging is critical. And then with the new payments platform, as many of you know, Swift is building the basic infrastructure, the three parts to that, the network, the switch, and the proxy addressing service, the aliases and the mobile number linkage to these very complicated bank state branch account numbers in the Australian system. I really just wanted to highlight a couple of features of this. One is the basic infrastructure. It's designed as a utility offering. So it's a little bit like providing electricity, but in this case we're talking about interbank payment rails. And it's a utility in the sense that it's a space of cooperation, and it's not a space as well to actually maximise profit outcomes. The commercialisation of the new payments platform, or the competition, is occurring in the overlay services. So this is the space of innovation, competition, commercialisation, and the reality is overlay services that don't provide real value to the customers they're serving, they probably won't survive. So you have this competitive market outcome of the best services will survive and be able to use the underlying payment service. If I move a little bit from a domestic initiative, like the new payments platform, and have a look at how, for us, the global payments or cross-border transaction banking, wholesale transaction banking, people call it many different things, how this is changing, what we're finding is that it's actually been challenged in a number of ways. This is a traditional value chain of a payment. It starts in the top left with a customer, and it moves through payment service providers, local banks, payment systems such as an ACH, and then ultimately larger banks that are transacting with each other large value amounts on a cross-border basis. The bank-to-bank and the large bank transacting with another large bank across border is what typically large institutions are using the SWIFT network for. And what we're finding is in this value chain, different companies are positioning themselves and connecting between actors in this chain and actually disintermediating players within that. I mean, if I ask you, LatiPay, where would LatiPay fit on this scheme? I think there's something of a payment service provider connecting to another payment service provider, or maybe a PSP to a customer. So, but they do not reach deeply into the traditional payments value chain. There may be a bank helping with settlements along the way, and even LatiPay needs to store their money somewhere. But you can use this framework to actually think about how different stakeholders and actors in the payments industry are looking to actually change the way that payments occur. So we've known this for some time, and we've been looking at how these payments occur, and fundamentally what we see is there's probably 3 or 4 core problems with the current global cross-border transaction experience today. They could be slow, they can be expensive, they can sometimes be very unpredictable, so we don't know when the payment will occur. We're unable to trace the payments. So has the payment moved from bank A to bank B? You make a phone call, not really sure. We think it left bank A this morning. It may be on its way to bank B. And then ultimately as well, these payments, they don't carry a lot of information. So there's not a lot of intelligent messaging behind this as well. I liken this a little bit. I used to go on holidays 20 years ago. and I would go with my family to a coastal place north of Sydney, and I would send my friends a postcard at the start of my holiday. And when I got home, I really wasn't sure whether my friends had actually received the postcard or not. Did you get it? Oh, no, I haven't yet. And it would turn up a week later. So there was a lot of uncertainty about that experience. That's gone away, of course. We now email each other, or we make phone calls and send messages. The global transaction payment experience, unfortunately, is a little bit like that sometimes. And so what we're trying to do with this initiative is bring financial institutions together around the world to develop a standard set of service level agreements that will govern the end-to-end payment experience, so that it will provide the traceability, the transparency, and the certainty of payment outcome as well. There are 4 basic rules: same-day payment outcomes, so good funds on a same-day basis, the end-to-end payments tracking, and I'll show you that in a moment, and the information as well will also be transferred unaltered from initial sender of payment to ultimate beneficiary as well. We found that this has been a very interesting and important area for the banks, to the point of over 90 banks have now joined this initiative. And these 90 banks actually manage today about 75% of global cross-border transaction banking flow. So it's a very large segment of the banks have actually committed to this initiative. So where's the innovation in this? One of the major innovations is what we call the tracker in the cloud. The initiative is called the Global Payments Innovation Initiative, or GPI. And this tracker provides something of a DHL-like experience. So when you send your parcel, you can track through a unique reference number where that parcel is in the process of sending it, for example, from Singapore to New Zealand. The idea is to actually replicate that process to a payment as well, and this is all managed through a database which is held in the cloud, and banks can access that to track where those payments are. If you think about one of the benefits, if you're a bank serving a large corporate, you can use this service to provide to your corporate customer the information that says, at 4 p.m, you'll actually receive that $10 million that is owing to you. So the corporate treasurer has the benefit of knowing when that money will go into their account, and they can plan to use that fund for other purposes. I'll move on. Just a quick overview of how we think about blockchain. Has anybody had this question in their boardroom or their planning meetings? What colour would you like your blockchain? We get a bit of that as well. The reality is that when we think about blockchain, and we're very interested in the technology, we think it has a lot of potential, particularly in some use cases. We're seeing some value being understood in securities markets, for example, so helping with the post-trade settlement processes in securities markets, with propagating information, with reconciliation. There are some benefits that are worth looking at much more closely. But what we tend to do, and we did this work with Accenture, we published a paper, and we looked at what we thought were 8 non-negotiable features or characteristics of a blockchain to be introduced on a scale basis. And just pause, and if you can have a look at some of these: security, compliance, standards, governance, and just ask yourself, how ready do you think blockchain is today, or digital ledger technology is, to actually tick each of those boxes? When we did this analysis, what we found is that today, and I think most of us intuitively know this, that digital ledger across some of these features is quite immature, and that there are some gaps to be closed to be able to trust a digital ledger technology with the process of, for example, cross-border transaction banking. That being said, if there are any fintech organisations in the audience here and you're developing blockchain and digital ledger, I would encourage you to have a look at this paper. It pretty much gives you a summary of, if you wanted to have a digital ledger applied to some of these larger global system contexts, these are some of the things that you need to do. So if you can help our industry, help our organisation solve some of these things, you will have, amongst the many hundreds of blockchain ideas out there, what is potentially a winning idea. But really focusing on these things are critical in the financial services industry and the payments industry. Digital ledger, we have proof of concepts in our labs. We have our inner tribe, which engages with startup communities. Swift also, some of you may know, has a Swift Institute where we provide grants to academics to research different topics. There are a number of blockchain and digital ledger research pieces coming through there. We've been doing work on ISO 20022 standards and digital ledger. Obviously, interoperability and having different ledgers talk to each other are really important on a scale basis as well. We sit on the board of Hyperledger, so we're highly involved in that. And then Swift GPI, what I outlined before in terms of cross-border payments, over time, we could see a version 2 or version 3 taking some of these new technologies to actually improve these outcomes as well. So there's a little bit of how we're thinking about digital ledger. And then I really wanted to finish on what is probably one of the more serious topics for all of us, and this is cybercrime. There have been some very highly publicised incidents. We've spoken about some of these today as well. And the reality is this is a problem that is increasing all the time, and it is not something we can neglect. The cyber criminals are very smart, very sophisticated, and seeing large, if you like, economic prizes, and they're working very hard to disrupt our industry through cyber attacks and cyber threats. Because we're a community cooperative, we've taken an approach where, although the Swift network itself has not been breached, the breaches have been in our customer environments, we have taken an approach where we have designed a program to help the community respond to the threat of cyber attacks. And we see this in 3 parts. It's about you and your financial institution. It's about the parties that you transact with, so you need to know who they are. And it's also the broader community as well, so being able to share information across those communities. What we've done with this is turn this into a program we call the Customer Security Program. And there are 5 key streams and 3 enablers of that Customer Security Program as well. And you can see some of those there. The first one is improving information sharing amongst the global community. You would be surprised how many financial institutions do not report that they have been attacked. And in all of these cyber incidents, the modus operandus has been the same. The attacker gains credentials to access the customer environment. They submit fraudulent transactions, and then they take steps to remove the record of those transactions, making it very difficult for the institution that has been attacked to find a record of that attack as well. So when you look at malware that's being introduced into customer environments, if you can share that information and make it available to the global community, then you can introduce patches and you can protect the next customer from that same instance of malware as well. So the information sharing is really important. Number 2, we're hardening our customer environments, and we're providing all sorts of tools that can help customers identify whether they have been breached, whether there has been an attack. Number 3 is really important as well. So cyber guidelines. For anybody who's using the Swift network here, I would remind you that it is very important to keep up to date on all of the software releases, whether you're using Swift or other providers as well. And what we'll be doing, and we have a 2-month consultation process at the moment, is introducing a number of control principles that we will require our customers to attest to, that my security environment meets these control principles. And then we'll also be undertaking audits of some customers as well. So this is a community problem, and it needs to be managed at a community level as well. So then when we look at New Zealand, just 3 slides here. We published some work with Deloitte on global fintech hubs, and you can see the results of this survey here. The United Kingdom, Australia, Singapore, a number of the US, of course, a number of countries feature quite prominently in here. What I might ask the New Zealand community is, how can you interact with these financial technology hubs? So develop your own financial technology and fintech response in New Zealand, but how can you benefit from working with these hubs as well? They're typically non-competitive There is a little bit of competition going on globally in these hubs, but they're typically non-competitive. And you see places like Singapore, they're actually looking to source ideas and technologies from places in South America these days to bring talent to Singapore. So it's really important to work with these other marketplaces. And then here in New Zealand, Swift provides the core messaging platform for the high value system, the messaging that goes through the ESAS environment on the low value side with the settlement before interchange. We think there's a really good opportunity to be introducing ISO 20022 and more intelligent messaging into the settlement before interchange experience. So it's been speeding up. We heard that it's about an hour now to clear good funds into a customer account. That intelligent messaging could be a real enrichment of that experience in SBI. And then the cross-border experience is really important here as well for New Zealand. So I'd probably just leave you with, be curious, be open, be aware that industry is quite different, competition is quite different these days. Do it safely, so don't compromise on things like security. Don't underestimate the cyber threat that's out there. Innovate and partner as well. And I'd like to just leave you with a video which summarises our global payments innovation initiative. For those of you who are familiar with Blade Runner, this classic science fiction, there's a little bit of this in here as well, but hopefully you can see some of these themes come through this payment experience, which we think is probably the near future, not the far future.
So I think we've reached a very successful conclusion.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. So it's my understanding you're flying out this evening?
Yes.
ありがとうございました。
Success. There you go.
Oh, thank you.
Hey, Lawrence.
Hi, Ian. Look, I know you've put a lot of work in on this, so I thought you should be the first to know. We've signed the contract.
Fantastic. Does that mean that I can push the green light on this end?
Hi Ian, it's Anya. We're almost complete. We also just wanted to keep you in the loop with the payment.
Yep. You should see all the details in front of you now.
Fantastic. Time is of the essence. The deadline for our first shipment goes out this afternoon.
We've also just sent Mr. Tanaka the payment request, which is everything he needs.
Yeah. Looks like he's got it.
Taxi! Hey guys, look, I know it's getting late there. I can track the payment and keep you posted.
Oh, there's no need for you to do that, Ian. Thank you. Payment is complete. We've just got access to the funds.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you very much.